A good parent will give their children rules to follow for their safety, happiness, and long-term benefit. Well, God has done the same for us, and although we don't always choose to obey those rules, that doesn't change who's ultimately in charge. Let's join Dr. Evans today as he tackles the complexities of God's rule and how our choices, for good or bad, fit into the picture of the Creator's sovereignty.
So what do we mean by the sovereignty of God? The sovereignty of God refers to God as absolute ruler, controller, and sustainer of all of his creation. To talk about sovereignty is to talk about rule or authority. And he sits on the throne of the universe. Everything he created, he rules over. And he created everything. What this means is that there is no noun, person, place, thing, or thought that situates itself or operates outside of God's sovereignty. That there is nothing that escapes him, nothing that can override him, nothing that he is not fully aware of, because he rules all things, because he either causes all things to happen, one option, or he consciously allows things to happen. But there are no oops, mistakes, missed that one, or surprises. Because if it happened, he either made it happen or he okayed it happening, even if he didn't directly cause it to happen. So let's get this straight. Nothing exists outside of the rule of God in your life, in this world, or in creation. The Bible says not one bird falls to the ground of which he is not fully aware, and not one hair of one's head is lost, that he is not fully overseeing that. So he is not just sovereign in the sweet by and by, he's sovereign in the nasty here and now. He's sovereign in the big things and he's sovereign in the details. He is absolute ruler over all things. Job chapter 23 verse 13 says, God does what his soul desires. Job chapter 42 verse 2 says, no purpose of God can be thwarted or overridden. He will achieve his goals. Psalm 115 verse 3 says, God is in the heavens and he does whatsoever he pleases. Psalm 135 verse 6 says, God rules from the heaven, and that even includes the fish in the sea. Isaiah 14 verse 27, Isaiah 43 verse 13 says that God rules and his ruling cannot be overrun or reversed by man. He is absolute ruler of all. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 11, he does all things after the counsel of his will. Revelation chapter 19 verse 6, our God reigns. So when we talk about the name God, the person God, we're talking about the absolute ruler, owner, creator, controller, sustainer of all things. Nothing sits outside of sovereignty. Perhaps we can relate it to this. Most in here have a home. You own your home. Or the bank makes you think you own your home. So you are responsible for your home. You ever have anybody come over to your home and tell you how your home ought to operate? Suppose somebody came in and said, well, I don't like that furniture. I don't like that paint. I don't like how you have it arranged. Well, that may be your opinion, but it's virtually irrelevant until you start paying the house note, paying the utilities. Worse yet is when you have folk who not only come to your home, but live in your house, who want to intrude on your sovereignty. I mean, Anthony was here, and one of the reasons God gives preachers kids is so they can come up with fresh illustrations. This is as fresh as it gets. He comes home from LA, and he comes into my house, which last time I checked, he has not paid one note on, has not volunteered. He comes open up the refrigerator, having put no food in it. He uses my coffee. He comes to my it kind of takes over. You know? As far as I'm concerned, boy, you are a visitor, okay? So he comes in. So we have a little issue. Because he likes the house ice cold. I mean, he thinks he's moving to Alaska or something. He turns that thing down. So the thermostat is in my room, my bedroom. I'm in the bedroom with the door closed. Do you think he knocked on the door? No, he did not. He walks right in the bedroom, turns the thermostat down, and I'm looking at him like he done lost his mind. And then he's going to come in, turn the thermostat down, talking about, I'm hot. You hot. You hot in my house, touching my thermostat, walking through my door without permission. So I said, just a minute. You're not going to make me uncomfortable in my own house so you can be comfortable when I'm paying the bill. Go in the den, sleep in the den where there is another unit and you can get as cold as you want to. But don't pretend like this is your house by adjusting it. Maybe some of y'all got kids like this. I ain't the only one. In other words, he came in functioning like a sovereign, functioning like an owner, functioning like a ruler when he was barely a visitor. And isn't that where we get into conflict with the teenagers when they think they're more grown than they ought to be? How do you think God feels, who's owner of the world, and he got these grown kids wanting to dictate to him his creation? Crystal, when she was growing up, she had got this little rebellious streak going on, and we were having a little disagreement. I don't remember what the disagreement was over, but we were having a little conflict, father-daughter conflict, and I said, well, this is the way it's going to be. This is the way it's going to be. She didn't like my ruling. So she storms away from me while I'm talking. Exactly. She storms away from me while I'm talking, and I say, where you going? She said, I'm going to my room. I had to help her sister out. I said, no, you go into the room I might let you sleep in. Because she was taking ownership. And Priscilla, I see you. I haven't forgot that you're sitting right there. Well, I got a whole sermon for you, so I'm gonna let that lie. God is ruler of all things. We are his tenants in his house of his creation. He lets us exist in for a while. When you lose sight of his sovereignty, rulership, then you act like an owner, which creates conflict with the owner. This leads to a second issue about his sovereignty. And that is, how does his sovereignty relate to our choices? When God created his world, he included something in the creation: choice. He gave men freedom to make decisions. If If he would have removed choice, then he would have removed humanity. Because God wanted people to respond to him by choice, not by mandate. Didn't want us to be robots, where he just wind us up and we do what he says. He put 2 trees in the garden. He says, eat this one, don't eat this one. You choose. Now, let's explain choice. Choice never negates sovereignty. Let me say that again. Choice is real, but it never negates sovereignty. Here's what I mean. On a football field, you have sovereign lines, non-negotiable lines. You got sidelines, you have a goal line, you got hash lines, you got the lines every 5 yards. Those lines don't move. They are not to be negotiated, for they are fixed. They're sovereign lines, non-negotiable boundaries. However, within those boundaries, each team can choose which plays they run, which plays they don't run. Some plays they're going to make progress. Some plays they lose yardage, because they get to make choices. But what they don't get to do is change the boundaries. The boundaries are fixed. So the moment a player runs and he steps on that sideline, a whistle's going to blow because you have infringed on the boundary. The boundary cannot be negotiated, but within the boundary, you can make decisions. God has established sovereign boundaries of which he will let nobody cross. But within those boundaries, he's let you make choices. So sovereignty involves choice. Therefore, here it is, choice allows for evil. Let me put it another way. God doesn't create evil, he creates choice. But when God creates choice, choice allows for evil. Because the mere fact I can choose for means I can choose against. So the fact that God has given you a choice means that you can do like Adam, not choose him, choose against him, and therefore have the repercussions of the choice, therefore sin. Satan fell when he chose to rebel against God. Adam and Eve fell when they chose to rebel against God, which allowed evil to exist. The Bible is clear. God cannot sin, nor does he cause sin, but he allows for sin because he allows for choice.
Dr. Evans will come back to unpack that idea when he continues our lesson in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you about his brand new book called Prayers for Knowing God. It's a collection of more than 50 prayers designed to help you better understand God in areas of his mercy, his goodness, his lasting purposes, and so much more. The book goes hand in hand with Tony's current 12-part audio series, God's Heart Revealed, and that's why we're bundling them all together. You can receive this audio and book package as our thank you gift when you make a contribution toward Tony's ministry. This special offer is only available through Monday, so let one of our resource team members help you make the arrangements right away. Just call us at 1-800-800-3222 any time of the day or night. Again, that's 1-800-800-3222. Or you can make your contribution and request online at tonyevans.org. That's tonyevans.org. Dr. Evans will come back with more of today's lesson right after this.
How do you share the gospel with confidence? What's God's plan for our communities? Why does the Old Testament matter to your faith today? Those are just a few of the questions you'll get answered when you enroll in the Tony Evans Training Center, an interactive online study experience with Dr. Tony Evans, where you can grow in your knowledge of God's Word and learn to advance His kingdom agenda in your life. Visit TonyEvansTraining.org to get started today. That's TonyEvansTraining.org.
God's sovereignty is controlled by his attributes. The reason why God rules all is because all that makes him God, his attributes, his omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, his veracity, his holiness, his grace, his mercy, his wrath, his justice, all of these things that we'll get into later. Those are attributes of God, and the attributes of God assure that sovereignty occurs, because when all of those attributes are collected, nothing can sit outside of them. Therefore, because God manifests his attributes, glory, there needs to be conditions under which various attributes are needed and therefore manifested. So God allows things, even if they are against him, because those things that he allows that are against him create opportunity for him to reveal something about himself that would otherwise not be seen. So Romans chapter 1 verse 18 says, for the wrath of God is revealed against all unrighteousness. Romans chapter 9 verses 22 and 23. What if God willing to reveal his wrath? So one of the attributes of God is wrath. But the only reason you need wrath is because you have sin. But the only reason you have sin is because there's a choice. So the choice produced sin. The sin opened the door for wrath. So God's nature of wrath gets revealed because sin has been demonstrated because men have rejected God and chosen to rebel against him. So even the rebellion of man creates an open door for God's character of wrath to be manifested. But the reality of sin creating the open door for wrath also creates a new door that can be opened called mercy. Because mercy is not getting what you do deserve that wrath calls for because sin was acted on. So everything that happens is an open door to reveal another aspect of God, whether it's for him or against him, he's going to show up in it. You have to understand. God will always accomplish his purpose. What you do or do not do will never block God from getting to where he's designed to go. Okay? He will go with you, around you, or over you, but you will never interfere with his end result. God will always accomplish his purposes because God never limits himself to one route. This church is 11 miles from downtown Dallas. There is a preferred route to go to downtown Dallas, a direct line, 35 North. You get on 35 North, it will take you directly to downtown Dallas. That is the preferred route. That is the quickest route. But sometimes 35 North gets blocked with an accident, gets blocked with construction, and the route is no longer the convenient way to go. Well, because of Google Maps and other technology, you're not limited to 35. They will show you other options. If you know it, there are more than one options than your preferred route. God would prefer to accomplish his plan with your cooperation. That's what he would prefer. Because if he can accomplish it with your cooperation, everybody wins. But if you don't cooperate, don't think you were his only option. He's got multiple ways of accomplishing his goal. He can do it with you or without you. He can go around you or run over you. But no human being will thwart God's ultimate plan. You are his preferred route, never his only route. And so when you understand that God's sovereignty does not negate your choice, it includes freedom to choose. You are free to choose. But you need to know when you choose against him, you have opened up the door for the manifestation of another attribute. Because God exists for his glory, and the glory is the manifestation of his characteristics, perfections, or attributes. God is so good at what he does, he even uses evil to accomplish his goals. Isn't this what Joseph said in Genesis 50 verses 19 to 21? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good to bring me to this place. Guess how God got me here? God got me here by you boys getting jealous. God got me here by you selling me into slavery. God got me here by you accusing me of rape. God got me here by forgetting me in jail. God got me here from Pharaoh having a bad dream. And God didn't use all that mess to bring me to this place. And see, that's the good news about the sovereignty of God. He can take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of the other and put it in his cosmic blender. By itself, it may not look like much. You take the flour by itself, it ain't much. You take the sugar by itself, it ain't much. You take the different ingredients of a cake by themselves, it's not much. But bake it right. And all those independent elements are joined together to accomplish something. That's why Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to them who love God and are the called according to his purpose. He says, I prefer 35. Cooperate with me. Help a deity out. Work with me here. He's so good at what he does as sovereign, he even uses the devil to help him out. That's as bad as you can get. That's as low as you can go. Because the devil is not the devil is his devil. Peter, Luke 22, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat. Satan has made a request. Why? Because even the devil can't do anything without asking God first. And we're going to let him mess with you a little bit to put you in your place. But when you have been converted, when your life gets right, when you stop trying to do this stuff on your own, when you learn your lesson, then I can use you. But I'm going to let the devil mess with you a little bit because you ain't thinking right. You ain't acting right. You're not living right. So I'm going to let him blow you up until you get right. Then I can fix your life. The only reason Job's life fell apart was because the devil made a request of God and God okayed it. And the great apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he said there was a messenger sent from Satan to buffet me, to oppress me. And I went to God and I said, God, get the devil off my back. You ever said that to God? Get the devil off my back. He said, God, get the devil off my back. And God said, no. No, I'm going to let him ride you. Because I got to deal with something in your life that's a problem. And I need the devil to amplify it so that you see it, so that I can deal with it, so that you can get rid of it, so that I can do something special with you in a greater revelation.
Dr. Tony Evans, with some important words today on the rule of God. Now, this message is just one of the 12 lessons from Tony's audio series called God's Heart Revealed. And if you'd like to get a full-length copy of today's lesson, it's available in its entirety on both CD and digital download, including portions we don't have time to bring you on the air. Better yet, get it as a part of that special limited-time package I mentioned earlier, which includes all the messages in the series, along with Tony's brand new book, Prayers for Knowing God. All of these are our gift to you, our way of saying thanks when you make a contribution to help support Tony's ministry. Just contact us at 1-800-800-3222 to make the arrangements. Resource team members are standing by to assist. That's 1-800-800-3222. Or make your request online at tonyevans.org. That's tonyevans.org. On Monday, Dr. Evans will continue his examination of the rule of God and how that impacts every aspect of our lives. I hope you'll join us. The Alternative with Dr. Tony Evans is brought to you by the Urban Alternative and is celebrating 40 years of faithfulness thanks to the generous contributions of listeners like you.
Hello, Glen Arden. It's an honor to be with you. You may be seated. It's always a privilege for me to be here with my good friend, Pastor and Sister Jenkins, and to their great family, spiritual family here. And my wife will be joining me for the final service, but it's great to be with you here today. Pastor asked me to just mention we brought two books with us today that will kind of go a lot deeper into what we're going to share with you now on spiritual warfare. Victory in Spiritual Warfare and The Battle is the Lord's. So they'll be in the back for those who want them afterwards to take you deeper but hopefully we will give you a great introduction to the principles of it today. So let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, I ask that you will take the words of my mouth, the meditations of my heart, make them beneficial and acceptable to your people so that we will all grow and learn the secret of victory. In Jesus' name. Amen. A man went to the doctor one day and told the doctor, "Doc, I'm hurting all over. All parts of my body are in pain." He said, "Well, everywhere?" He said, "Well, yeah, everywhere." He said, "Well, touch your forehead." He touched his forehead and said, "Ah!" He said, well, touch your ear." He touched his ear and went, "Ooh!" "Wow, touch your shoulder." He touched his shoulder and went, "Ah!" Doctor said, "You idiot, you got a dislocated finger." See, sometimes it seems like everything is wrong. When actually only one thing may be wrong. I want to call your attention to 1 Samuel 17 in a very familiar story. You know it backwards and forwards. You've heard it all of your life. David and Goliath. But I want to give you maybe a little different take on it today, because I want to tell you how to defeat the giants in your life. First of all, we've got a problem. The problem's name is Goliath. And he's a giant. We're told in chapter 17, verse 6, that his height was 6 cubits and a span. That's approximately 9 foot 6 inches tall. So he's a giant. A giant is something that looms large in your life. It's huge. It's intimidating. It's so big. A giant is any noun, person, place, thing, or thought that looms too big to conquer in your world. You know when something's a giant in your life because it not only intimidates you, but it controls your emotions. Because verse 11 says, "And when Saul and all the Israel heard these words of the Philistine, that they were dismayed and greatly afraid." Verse 24 says, "When all the men of Israel saw the man, they fled from him and were greatly afraid." You know you have a giant in your life when it's telling you what you've got to feel, when it's controlling your emotions, when it's causing your peace to become disruptive, be it a person, place, thing, or thought. That's a giant in your life. You know when something is a giant in your life because it just won't go away. Verse 16 says, "The Philistine came forward morning and evening for 40 days and took his stand." You know when something is a giant because it shows up in the morning and won't let you go at night. It's attacking you all the time, day after day after day after day. Giants come in all shapes and sizes. There are financial giants and medical giants and circumstantial giants, and there are financial giants, there are emotional giants. They all have one thing in common. They want to own your world. They want to shape your emotions. They want to dictate your well-being. So here we are with a giant. Enter a young man named David, a teenager, who comes upon the scene where this giant has intimidated a whole nation, Saul and his army, bringing food from his father Jesse to his brothers who are on the battle line. And David comes and he faces the same problem with a different perspective. Now, if I were to ask you, what did David use to kill Goliath, the giant in his life? I'm sure many of you would say a stone and a slingshot, and certainly that was used as part of the program. But I would like to give you a more potent reason why David was able to slay the giant. And if you grab this reason, it'll enable you to slay the giants in your life. The nouns, the people, the places, the things, the thoughts that are seeking to control your world. You see, David had a different perspective, and he recites it twice, in verse 26 and in verse 36. Then David says in verse 26, he spoke to the men who were standing there, saying, "What will be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should taunt the armies of the living God?" He says now in verse 36, "Your servant has killed both a lion and a bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, since he has taunted the armies of the living God." Now, if you read that verse too fast, you'll miss it. David saw something that Saul and none of the other soldiers in Israel saw. All of them saw a 9'6" giant. What David saw when he looked at him is, that man has not been to the doctor. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Everybody else was looking up here. David was looking down there. And David says, that man has not been to the doctor. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine? It was the presence or absence of the circumcision that shifted David's perspective. A perspective is not what you see. A perspective is how you look at what you see. Let me give you the spiritual principle for victory in spiritual warfare. It's this. If all you see is what you see, you do not see all there is to be seen. Let me say that again. If all you see is what you see, then you do not see all there is to be seen. It is the enemy's goal to keep you seeing only what you see. Because if he can keep you seeing only what you see, you will only react to what you see. But if what you see is all you see, you will not see all there is to be seen. A little boy one day lost his contact lenses. They popped out of his mouth in a carpeted area. So he's panicking 30 minutes looking for this contact. He tells his mother, "Mama, the contact popped out of my eye. I can't find it." She said, "Let me help you, son." And in less than 60 seconds, she found the contact lens after he had been searching 30 minutes. He said, "Mama, how could you find it so quickly when I've gone so long trying to find it?" She says, "Because, son, we weren't looking for the same thing. You were looking for a contact lens. I was looking for $150 that was lost down there." It just depends on what you're looking at. That will determine what you see. He says, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" Now, what was it about circumcision that caught David's attention? Well, in Israel, the sign of the covenant for the male was circumcision. Circumcision brought you under the covenant of God. So circumcision was a covenantal act. So the question now is, what is a covenant? A covenant in the Bible is a spiritually binding bond. A spiritually binding bond. It was super glue. A covenant in the Bible was something God established to inaugurate an official relationship with his people. So he established a covenant with Abraham. He established a covenant with David. He established a covenant with Israel. The Bible says marriage is a covenant. The Bible says when you get saved, you become part of the new covenant. The Bible says when you take communion, you are participating in the new covenant of his blood. Whenever God wanted to establish something officially and make it legal in the spiritual realm, he would covenant it. So this is an official term that unfortunately many of God's people don't know about, but it is the authoritative term of how God relates to his people. David says that man hasn't been to the doctor, so that man is not under covenant. Now, why was it important to know the man wasn't under covenant? Because covenant provides a covering. When you're under covenant, you're under cover. I don't know if it's raining out, but when I came in this morning, it was raining outside. And while it was raining outside, when it's raining, you have an umbrella. The umbrella is meant to cover you. Now, you can have an umbrella but not be under it, or you can have an umbrella and be under the covering of it. When you open up the umbrella, it does not stop it from raining. It just stops it from raining on you because you're under cover. If you're not saved today, you're not with a covenant. You don't have an umbrella. If you are saved today, you have the covenant, but you may not be under it. So you're still going to get wet. So everybody who's saved has the covenant, but the question is, are you operating underneath it? In football, everything is dependent upon the location of the football. First downs are determined by where the football is placed. Touchdowns are determined by whether the football across the plane of the goal line. Field goals are determined by whether the ball goes to the post. Complete passes are determined by whether the ball was dropped or caught. You take away that football and $1 billion industry collapses. That one little thing controls everything else. The victory or defeat in the spiritual battles of your life will be determined by your proximity to the covenant. So if you don't understand the covenant, if you're not in the covenant, or if you're not underneath the covering of the covenant, then that means you are on your own. So many Christians, although saved, are on their own and are running from the Goliaths in their lives because they're not under cover. They're not underneath the covenant of God. It is your alignment to this covenant. See, many Christians want to date God when he wants a wedding ring. They want to be in the vicinity of God without making a covenantal commitment to God, and wonder why they don't have victory and authority when the giants show up in their lives. And so what they do is they transfer covenant for activities and wonder why I go to church, it's not working. I read my Bible, it's not working. I pray my prayers and nothing is working. I had a problem in my garage not too long ago, and that is I went to get in my car to go to the office for a meeting, and I pushed the garage door opener and the door would not open. I pushed and I pushed and I pushed and I pushed, but the door would not open. I went over and tried to push it up, but the door was too big and too heavy. It would not open. So now I'm frustrated because it's not that I'm not trying. It's not that I'm not pushing. It's not that I'm not trying to lift the problem over my head. It's just that nothing was working. So I picked up the telephone and I called the garage repairman and I said, my garage door is not working and I don't know what else to do. I need you to do something to let me out so I can get my car to the garage, I can go to my meeting. He said, do me a favor. I said, what? He said, go over to the garage door, keep the phone in your ear, go over to the garage door. So I went over to the garage door. He said, now look down to your left and to your right. I looked down to my left, I looked down to my right. He says, you see 2 square canisters? I said, yes. He said, which way are they pointing? I said, one is pointing over here and the other one is pointing out. He said, that's your problem. Those canisters aren't talking to one another because they're not aligned with one another. So they're not getting the signal. And because they're not getting the signal, you don't have the power to open up the door. The power is missing because the alignment is missing. So if you'll just take this one and turn it so it faces that one, you'll find power that was already available that was not talking to one another. So I took this canister, made it face that canister, pushed the button, and that which I was trying to force just rose up all by itself because I was in proper alignment. If you are not covenantally aligned, then despite the fact you're saved, despite the fact you go to church, despite the fact you read your Bible, despite the fact you pray, without covenantal alignment, there you cannot draw down divine authority. And if you don't even know to think, to look behind what you see, everything visible and physical is preceded by something invisible and spiritual. Everything visible and physical is preceded by something invisible and spiritual. So if you want to correct something that's visible and physical, you must first identify and correct the thing that's invisible and spiritual. But if you do not first identify and correct the invisible spiritual cause, you cannot come up with a visible physical cure. If you do not identify the visible physical cause, then you cannot come up with a visible physical solution. So what Satan wants to keep you doing is to keep you dealing with what your 5 senses partake of. What you see, hear, taste. He wants to keep you in the physical so that you miss the spiritual, so that you're not covenantal, so that there is no authority that you can draw down from heaven. But once you see what you can't see, then you can deal with something beyond what you do see. Because if all you see is what you see, you do not see all there is to be seen. And so David sees the fact that this man has not been cut. This man has not been to the doctor, so he has no divine authority associated with him. He's just a big guy. He's looking big. So let me give you a little thing to do. It's a real simple thing to do. Identify the giant in your life, whatever that giant is in your life, that thing that looms large, that is intimidating, that is controlling your emotions. And I want you to right now, before I even finish the rest of my sermon, give it a name. I want you to give that giant the name Goliath. Because if you give it Goliath, you'll know where it's going to wind up. So let's move on and see where this giant winds up. So David now is decided that he's detected the spiritual default in this man. The Philistine in verse 41 comes and approaches David with the shield bearer in his hand, and then he looks at David with disdain. He says, you're a youth, verse 42, you're ready. And he says, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks and a stone, with slingshots? And then Goliath makes the spiritual mistake. He's going to make a spiritual mistake. And any giant outside of God's will in your life is going to make the same spiritual mistake. And it's the spiritual mistake you want your giant to make. You need your giant to make this mistake. What was the mistake? He says in verse 43, the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you call that? Am I a dog? In verse 43, that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Oh, now the Philistine went spiritual because he cursed David by his gods. You know, many of you know my son was a Washington Redskin for 1 year. And after he came out of Baylor, and he's a Washington Redskin, and we came up to the games, and he was a fullback. So the quarterback gets the ball and would hand it off, and sometimes he got the handoff, and we handed off to my son Jonathan. When my son Jonathan got the ball, something happened. When the quarterback got the ball, everybody came after the quarterback because the quarterback had the ball. But once he handed the ball off, everybody left the quarterback and went over to my son or the halfback, whoever got the ball. Okay? Because whoever had the ball inherited the problem. Okay? The enemy's coming after the quarterback as long as the quarterback has the ball. But once the quarterback hands off the ball, the enemy has to go to where the ball is, whoever is holding it. So guess what? Goliath says, I'm coming to you in the name of my gods. David says, you come to me, verse 45, with a sword and a spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. Oh, you think your God is better than my God? He made it a spiritual battle between gods. Guess what David did? He handed the football off. He says, I'm going to let my God fight your God. I'm going to get you gods fighting. Because if I can get my God against your God, then I can handle you against me, because I've handed the problem off to somebody who's bigger than you and your gods. Because he understood the covenant. And because he's operating covenantally, he knows Goliath is not operating covenantally. He knows he has authority. Now, let me show you something David does. He does an amazing thing when you're operating covenantally. He says, I come to you in the name of the Lord of the armies of Israel. He uses God's name. Now, there's a whole theology of names, but let me summarize it for you. Names in the Bible, God has 85 names in the Old Testament, 85 different names. Why does God have 85 different names? Because he attaches a name to a situation. And the name he attaches is relevant to the need of the scenario. So when you see these 85 names popping up all through the Old Testament, that's because there are all these different scenarios he's addressing. So guess what? He's got a name for your giant, okay? Because his name always pops up in different scenarios. So when he creates in Genesis 1:1, he uses the name Elohim. In the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth, because that's his creator name. When he creates man, he uses the name Yahweh or Jehovah. Capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. When you see all four letters capitalized, that's Jehovah, because that's God's relational name. Because now he wants to relate to man. When he wants to show you he's in charge, he's got a Hebrew name, Adonai. Adonai means your boss, your manager, the one who tells you what to do. When you need somebody to meet a need, he's Jehovah Jireh, Genesis 22. So he got all these names because he's got all these situations we're in which we need the name of God. So David's in a battle. So guess what name he uses? Jehovah Saba. Jehovah Saba means the Lord who oversees an army. Why does he use that name? Because Goliath and the Philistines are an army. So God's got a name for whatever giant you're facing in your life, okay? He's got the appropriate name. Now, names are very important in the Bible. And they're important to us too. If I say Bill Gates, you think money. If I say Serena Williams, you think tennis, because those names have a reality attached to it. You're not going to name your child Hitler. You're not going to name your child Benedict Arnold, because what is attached to that name, you don't want to be attached to that child. If you call somebody chubby, that means they're fat. If you call somebody slim, that means they're skinny, because that name is reflecting a characteristic. So God's got all these names to reflect his character for the circumstance you find yourself in. What he wants you to do is he wants you to make your physical battle a spiritual battle, so he can deal with the spiritual reality, which empowers you to deal with the physical reality that you're facing, that you're intimidated by. Satan wants to keep you only dealing with the physical, skip the spiritual, because he knows if you skip the spiritual, he can control your life on the physical. But if you ever see the covenant and are operating undercover, being able to draw down authority, then you can use the name of God to overcome the false gods that are bringing about the physical challenge that you're facing in your life. Many of you know my son Anthony, and the singer, and he's when he first started singing, he was he was just learning his way, and he asked me to pick him up from the airport. I said okay. He told me what flight he was on, so I went to pick him up. He's the third person off the plane. We're walking to baggage claim, and as we're walking to baggage claim, halfway to baggage claim, I stop. I look at him. I said, "Oh, no, you didn't." He started laughing because he knew exactly what I meant. You see, if you're the third person off the plane, you in first class. If you're the third person off the plane, you in first class. But he didn't have first class ticket. He didn't have first class money. What he had was my name. Because he's a junior. So I knew what he had done. He had gone up and said, "My name is Tony Evans, and I'm an executive platinum flyer, and do you have any upgrades?" They said, "Oh, Dr. Evans, we're glad to have you flying with us again today." Guess what he did? He used my name, but because it became his name, because he's covenanted as my son, he could claim my authority to be bumped up to first class. He didn't have the authority, but he had my name. And when he used my name, he got clout that didn't belong to him. You may not have a name that has authority in hell, but God has a name that has authority everywhere. And if you're undercover, you can use that name to claim divine authority. We were on vacation. We were on vacation in Niagara Falls when the kids were young, and we drove all the way from Texas to Niagara Falls, New York, long drive. Got there weary, like 2 a.m. Got there, and we were all just dog tired. Went up to the hotel, and I hadn't made reservations. Exactly. In all my planning, I forgot to make reservation, and there were only a couple of hotels at Niagara Falls, and all of them were full. The next closest hotel that we could even get to was over an hour away. It's 2 a.m, we're dog tired. I forgot to get it, so nobody's happy in my car. Nobody's happy because Dad forgot to get the hotel. There were a line of people in front of us. Everybody was told, no more rooms, no more rooms, no more rooms. So I'm frustrated now, mad, don't want to talk to nobody, because, I made a mistake. I failed. And in my failure, it was affecting the well-being of my whole family. I said, all we can do is get something to eat, and let's get something to eat, even though it was still open, let's get something to eat, and then we'll just have to find a hotel. That's when Priscilla, Miss War Room herself, said, "But Daddy, we haven't talked to God about this problem." I ain't need her to tell me that. I don't need her telling me that. I'm the pastor. I tell you that. You don't tell me that. She said, "No, Daddy, we haven't talked to God about this problem." So I'm caught in betwixt because I'm not in a talk to God mood right now. So I told her, "You pray." So she prayed. She bowed her little head. She's a young teenager, about maybe 13 years old or something. And she said, "Now, Lord, we're in a situation we can't fix. We didn't make reservations. We stuck out here, Lord, and we're tired, Lord, and we haven't consulted you. My dad hasn't consulted you." So she prays this eloquent prayer, says amen. I say, okay, now let's get practical. Let's eat, and then we'll go find a hotel. while we were eating to get ready to go to get the next hotel, find another hotel, the manager comes over to the table. He says, "Sir, weren't you one of those families looking for a room?" I said, "Yes." "Well, there were some people in front of you. I can't find them. One of the families had an emergency. They got to leave right away. Do you still need a room?" I looked at Priscilla and said, "Shut up, shut up, shut up." But she was operating under covenant. I was looking at the circumstances. I was looking at the reality. Goliath is real. You can't deny him. He's 9'6". Don't make him smaller than he really is. But understand that behind him, there is a spiritual reality. He has not been to the doctor. So he doesn't have final say-so over your life, over your world, over your well-being. And so far, family, I want to challenge you today to go on the offense against your Goliaths. The things that loom large in your life that looks undefeatable. And start dictating to it in the name of God. In the name of God. A couple of days from now, we will be having our first great-grandchild. My granddaughter will be having a child. And she and her husband in Houston, and everybody's looking forward to this. Well, I have mixed emotions. I'm excited, but it reminds me of how old I am, so it's a mixed situation. But when my granddaughter, her name is Karis, was a little girl, she was over my house and she was screaming. She was outside in the yard screaming. I'm rushing to the door. A dog was chasing her. The dog was nipping at her, so she's terrified. Because she's a little girl, the dog is so much bigger. She calls me Poppy. She said, "Poppy, Poppy, the dog, the dog, the dog, the dog. Poppy!" She ran into my arms, huffing and puffing and screaming, and the dog is, she's huffing and puffing and screaming because she's terrified. She's a little girl being chased by a Goliath dog. But after a while, with the dog barking at my feet, with her in my arms, she looked up at me with tears coming down her eyes. And then she looked down at the dog. She looked up at me. Then she looked down at the dog. She looked up at me again. Then she looked down at the dog. And one more time she looked up at me. And this time she looked down at the dog and went, "Nah, nah, 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 nah." Where'd she get that power from? Where'd she get that authority from? Where did she get that ability from to stare her Goliath in the face and make fun of it? Because she knew that the one covenantally holding her was bigger than the one that was against her. The one that was scaring her was smaller than the one holding her. And when you understand that you're in the hands of a powerful God, all the devil and his giants can do is make noise. And you can go, "Nah, nah, 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 nah." Claim your authority in the name of Jesus Christ. God bless you. The books will go into more detail. Today I want to talk to you about freedom from oppression. What do we mean by oppression? Oppression is imposed domination of another person or a group of people in order to control them mentally, physically, emotionally, and the worst of all, spiritually, in order to stifle their aspirations and limit their potential. To be oppressed is to be dominated or held down or suppressed in such a way as to cancel or control or to limit your divinely ordained potential. Everyone here who has been created by God, which is everyone here, was created with potential. Things that God has endowed you with in order to realize your maximum abilities to be used under God. Your potential. A baby is a potential adult. It has to get there, but the potential for adulthood is resonant in the baby. That's where they're going. Oppression seeks to hold that down, to limit you, to stifle you, to control you so you don't reach your potential. So that you're stopped from maximizing your divinely ordained reason for even being here. It involves restricting your God-given human potential so that it can stop God's plan for your life. It's called oppression. Now, oppression can take many forms on many levels. There is political oppression. You find this in dictatorships or military governance, where a particular dictator, in order to limit the power of others in the name of a political order, it's Russian communism under Lenin, and that Marxist way of life, where walls are built to hold people in and to stop them from being able to move from one place or another place. It is to hold them or contain them, to limit them. There is economic oppression. This is where the rich hold the poor down, keep them in classes so that they're not able to express themselves, get free to develop their own entrepreneurial spirit. Is where they are limited and they're stuck in ghettos, not because that's where they want to be, but that's where the system has forced them to stay. Economic oppression. We're all familiar in the United States of America with racial oppression, where people are held down because of the color of their skin, and the color of their skin prohibits them access to that which the rest of the society has free access to, simply because how they look. There is domestic oppression. You often see this when a wife or a woman is so controlled by a man because of the threats of violence. I was sitting in my office one day, and a husband and wife came in for counseling, and it became clear what the problem was, which had not yet been verbalized, because when the husband raised his hand to scratch his neck, she jumped. So it became very clear very quickly that this woman was living in fear. She was under the thumb of a dictator who, falsely using the biblical word submit, was actually using God's way to oppress. Parents sometimes are oppressive to their children. That's where child brutality comes in, where the children are terrified because the parents don't spank to correct. They spank to hurt and to bring harm and are brutal. It's all oppressive. It's all holding people down. Some of us grew up in oppressed homes where we were told we were nobody. We were never going to be anything. We couldn't expect to be anything. We were dumb. And so whether you were physically brutalized or not, that thing stuck in your mind. And it became an oppressive way of looking at life and looking at yourself. And you know when people have been affected that way, because even when there's nobody surrounding them to oppress them, they oppress their own selves. Self-oppression. All designed to stifle your potential and your God-given future. And then, of course, there's the worst kind of oppression of all, spiritual oppression. That's where the devil has his way with your life. He's telling you, you got to stay on these drugs. You've got to stay in this alcohol. You have to stay in this relationship that's doing you no good. You have to stay there. You can't break out. This is your lot in life. and you've been living with that spiritual oppression so long, you believe it's the truth. You believe you were born to be oppressed. The Bible says that Jesus came to set the captives free. That oppression is not to be your middle name. That oppression is not to be the state that you live in. It's not to be how you operate. That you have been freed by creation, simply because you're human, and then even more so by redemption, because you are a child of God. In the passage read in your hearing today, Israel is being held hostage in Egypt. Verse 23 of Exodus 2, now it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and the sons of Israel sighed because of the bondage, and they cried out, and their cry for help because of their bondage rose up to God. They were in bondage. Remember, freedom is released from illegitimate bondage. What happened? Well, if you look at chapter 1, verse 8, it says a new king rose in Egypt who did not know Joseph. The people of the sons of Israel, they said, are more mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply. And in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. Verse 12, and the more they were afflicted, and the more they multiplied and they spread. Verse 13, the Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor vigorously, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor. The end of verse 14, which they rigorously imposed on them. Notice the words. Imposed, compelled, bitter, afflicted, taskmaster. They were being bound, they were being forced, they were being driven. Why was there oppression? Because the oppressor did not want them to be free. The oppressor said, if we let these people go free, they'll become too strong. That's what he says. And that's what oppression always wants to do. It wants to limit you becoming strong. It wants to limit what God can do in your life. And so it begins to work its insidious evil in order to stop you from realizing your maximum potential. See, that's how you have to look at this thing. You have to look at this thing, whether it's spiritual oppression or whatever kind of oppression it is. It's trying to stop you from what the U.S. Army wants you to do. Be all you can be. Because God has destined you for freedom, which has to do with maximizing your potential under God. God has redeemed you for freedom. But the problem was there was an evil king who did not want them to be free, who wanted to keep them hostage. And I'm here today to tell you, freedom is your middle name. And that I don't care how long you have been oppressed. They have been oppressed for 430 years. I don't care how old you are today. Today is the day of your freedom. Whether it's self-imposed freedom, freedom by somebody else, freedom even in a culture, unless you understand that oppression in any form is against the will of God, no matter how legitimate it's been made to sound by the oppressor. God's gift to you. God's gift to you today is freedom. What did the king want? The king of Egypt wanted to use the children of Israel to further his agenda. What does the devil want? To use you to further his agenda. What he doesn't want you to do is to find out what God's got in store for you. He doesn't want you to further God's agenda. He wants you to further his agenda. And he knows if he can hook you up on something that now controls you. That's why Paul says, I will be controlled by nothing. You can be led by people. You can be led by things. But once something is controlling you, it has taken over God's place in your life. And the Bible has a word for that. It's called idolatry. Nobody is supposed to be able to control you but God. Folk can influence, folk can lead, folks can direct, But they're not supposed to be able to put their thumb on you so that you define you by them rather than by what God has created you to be. It says that the people groaned in chapter 2. They sighed because of their bondage. Because oppression has a way of crushing the human spirit. It causes the spirit to just die, to just shrivel up. And you see it. You can see it on the face of a child who's been oppressed by a parent. You can certainly see it on a wife who's been oppressed by her husband. You can see it in a man's eyes who's been oppressed by his employer, who's been made to feel like nothing. Look, if you're a janitor, you're supposed to be a free janitor. See, it's got nothing to do with how much you make and what your title is. And that's why nobody has the right to your spirit but God. Now, they may want to crush your spirit. They may want to tear down your spirit. See, that's why it's very important that you know that God tells you you're free. Because if you don't know that God tells you you're free, then other folks will define you and will be given permission. See, one of the worst things about oppression is not only that you're oppressed, but that you give the oppressor permission to keep oppressing you. Because you don't know who you are. If I have a gold ring on and you don't like it, you ain't make it. So you don't get to tell me what it is. It's gold because the manufacturer said it's gold. Now, you say, well, that ain't gold. Well, if I don't know what the manufacturer said, and I'm listening to what you tell me it is, I may not think it's gold anymore because I've given you more power than the one who made it. But as long as I can go back to the receipt and I can see that the man who made it said it's gold, it really don't matter what you think it is, whether you like it, whether you agree with it, because I've been told by the one who made it that it's gold. Well, guess what? The one who made you say you're free. The one who made you defines who you are and defines who your reality is. So they were under oppression for all of this time. They were being held down. But then it says, verse 23 again of chapter 2, it came about in the course of those many days that the king of Egypt died, and the sons of Israel sighed, and they cried out. That means they had not been crying out until the king of Egypt died. Follow me now. It says, when the king of Egypt died after many days, then they cried out to the Lord. Which means they had been under the oppressor, the king of Egypt, for an extended period of time prior to them crying out to God. In other words, they got used to oppression until the king died. As long as the king was alive, they didn't like it, but they accepted it. When the king was no longer there to enforce it, they remembered God. You see, one of the things you need to understand, because the king, remember, in Egypt is the government. The king is the government. And it amazes me how much Christians look to the government to be surrogate God for them. And you know we do it because we want the government to do everything, the king. But he says the king was the oppressor. The king was the one holding them down. It was only when the king was no longer there that they remembered that there was a God bigger than the king, because the king had obscured God. Now, I ain't trying to get political, although I could. But the Bible is clear that the government should be both limited and taxes should be low. That's the biblical principle. Government limited, taxes are low. You cannot be free if you're not also willing to be responsible. You got a teenager in your house and they want to be free. They want to be free from mother and father and rules and regulations and got to be home at 10 or 11 or 12. I want to be free. Okay, are you ready to pay your bills? Okay, you see, if you demand freedom, you are at the very same time demanding responsibility. Don't tell me you want to be free, but you want to be irresponsible. That's a contradiction in terms. God told Israel, he said, when you get to the promised land, don't expect any more manna from above. On the wilderness, I'm going to rain down your blessing. When you get there, pick up the shovel and the pick, and you pick up the oxen, and you plow the land. Because freedom demands responsibility. So we got folk waiting for God to drop stuff from heaven, when God has said, I thought you wanted to be free. And that means you take ownership and responsibility in order to enjoy freedom. You can't enjoy freedom and be irresponsible at the same time. So the more, getting back to political, the more you want the government to do, the less free you're asking yourself to be. Now, that's not a popular thing, and that won't get me votes, but I ain't running, so it don't matter. He says that when the king died, when government was no longer to handle this situation, they now are remembering God had a covenant. It says the covenant that he had with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They remembered God had something to say about this. What did God tell Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? God says, I'm going to bless you, and through you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. They remember, and I'm going to curse those who curse you, and I'm going to bless those who bless you. So it dawned on them when they remembered the covenant. God said he was going to curse those who curse us, because we're his covenanted people. Egypt has been cursing us with bondage and oppression. But God said if they curse us, they curse him. Any of you ever had a big brother, folk were messing with you, and you said, well, I'm going to go tell my brother. Or you had some cousins, or, violent brothers. Just, in other words, you remembered you got somebody bigger than your problem. God says in the Abrahamic covenant, I'm going to curse those who curse you, bless those who bless you. You cursing me? You cursing God? Hey! It says they cried out to God. They remember the covenant. You see, here's what oppressors have some things in common. And the thing that an oppressor does not want you to have is information. See, oppressors try to keep, that's why oppressors of people try to keep them uneducated, because they know if they get a little knowledge, they're going to discover that they got the right to be free. You see, they want to keep you ignorant. They want to keep you uneducated about the realities that are yours. You see, they want to forbid you to get an education, or certainly an equal education. They want to hold you down informationally, because if you don't know, you can't go. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed January 1863. We didn't discover that in Texas till June 19th, 1865. That information about June 1863 was withheld from slaves in Texas. But we discovered, the slaves in Texas, in June 19, 1865, that in January 1863, slaves were set free. Folk been partying ever since. Juneteenth. Be partying ever since. You know what the party's over? Somebody gave some information. Now you're going to discover something as we go along, and that is parties are not enough. Parties are fun. In chapter 15, it says, when the people got through the Red Sea, they had a party. It says Miriam left out, and they all went dancing and celebrating deliverance. They celebrated deliverance, but you can be delivered and not free, because they were partying about deliverance, still wanting to go back to Egypt. So partying is not enough. Barbecues won't cut it. Oppressors always want to withhold information. See, a husband who's oppressing his wife and emotionally beating her down and maybe even physically. See, he doesn't want her to know on the tail end of that verse of submission, it says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. See, all he wants, every time when I talk to a husband, he says she won't submit. But that's not the full verse. He doesn't want to know the other part of that verse. So when they're in front of me, I give them the rest of the story. That she is supposed to submit to you as to the Lord. So that if you're asking for submission in areas that God doesn't give you permission to ask for it or demand it, she is not obligated to submit to that. Now see, he get mad at me because I'm giving the rest of the information. Because oppressors don't want you to have the rest of the information because they want to keep you under their thumb because they want to control your future. Limit your destiny so that you don't maximize your potential. And it's done on every single level. But it says they remembered the covenant. They remembered that God had made an agreement to curse those who cursed them and bless those who blessed them. But you see, if you don't know you're supposed to be free, if you don't know that that's your God-given right and your redeemed right as a Christian, you got a twofold right to be free. Creation and redemption. That is, freedom, remember, is not doing whatever you want. Freedom is illegitimate bondage being released from in order to maximize your calling under God. If somebody doesn't tell you that, then you'll think slavery is normal. And I'm supposed to be messed up, jacked up, defeated, not making anything of my life, on drugs, on alcohol, in relationships that do you know the amount of women who live year after year in abusive relationships? In abusive relationships because they don't think they're supposed to be free. I had a couple in my office and the husband is abusing the wife and it was clear, it wasn't a question mark. And then he said the wrong thing to me. He said, she's my wife, I'll do what I want. I looked over her and said, when you go home, pack your bags and leave that fool. Okay? Because he misunderstood his role. He was out of line. And he was forcing her down with faulty information, and she was hooked in this unhealthy relationship in the name that I'm the husband. If you name the name of Jesus Christ, you're supposed to be God's husband, not a husband. You're supposed to be, you're not from the street. You don't get your information from who let the dogs out. That's not where you do your data collection. And so we got this faulty information and we don't want to hear the rest of the story. And one of the ways you know people are oppressed is they keep wanting to go back to their oppressor. Remember, Israel said, chapter 14, look at chapter 14, verse 10. And Pharaoh drew near and the sons of Israel looked and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they were very frightened. So the sons of Israel cried out to the Lord. Then they said to Moses, is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you dealt with us in this way, bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Now, last time I checked, they were crying out to God. In chapter 3, now they're saying, no, didn't we tell you we wanted to stay here? Because people who've been really oppressed can't leave the oppressor. That's why they go back to the drugs and back to the alcohol and back to the unhealthy relationships. And they would go back to the situation because they've been so conditioned by oppression that they are tethered back to it. Because they don't see their own value for freedom. They don't see their own value. That you have been created and you have been redeemed to be free, to fulfill your calling under God. And anybody who seeks to take that is doing so illegitimately, and you need to know that. You may not be able to change the situation right now. It may be too big, it may be too social, it may be too economic, but at least you need to know that you've been called to be free. Some of us are slaves in our own home, and we're slaves in our own home because you got rooms in your home none of the family can go in, but guests can go in. So in other words, you think more of guests than you do your own family. In fact, you don't even go in there, and you paying the bill. Some of us got dishes nobody can eat off of but guests. So guests come once a year, so the dishes are used once a year, so the best you have is for everybody else. It's not for you. Because you don't think enough of yourself that you are free to enjoy the things that company can have. Oh, I'm all out there now. God declares you're free. And I'm not talking about, wait, little kids can break things and mess things up. That's being responsible. But I'm talking about free to maximize the goodness of God, the calling of God, and the purposes on your life. I am here to declare to you, you're free. God declares you're free, and he is interested in setting his people free. Look back at chapter 3. He says in verse 7, the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have given heed to their cry because of their taskmasters, for I am aware of their suffering. So I have come down to deliver them from the power of the Egyptians, and to bring them up from the land to a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to a place of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now behold, the cry of the sons of Israel has come up to me. Furthermore, I have seen the oppression, there it is, the oppression with which the Egyptians are oppressing them. God says, I'm aware of your pain. God is aware of your suffering. And he knows how long you've been suffering. The first thing he wants to do is give you some information. You have a right to be free. You have the right to take the initiative to pursue your freedom. So how do you do that? Well, you got to remember, first of all, your covenantal rights. They remembered their covenant. They remembered God says, if they curse you, they curse me. They don't have a right to curse me. You've got to, first of all, know you have the right to be free, to be unencumbered from God's calling on your life. You know, you don't have the right to be irresponsible. You don't have the right to fall under God's chain of command. Children, obey your parents. Wives, legitimately submit to your husbands. Husbands, submit to Christ. You don't have the right to break God's plan and program, but you have the right to pursue your full potential under God. You have that right. You have the right to not let drugs tell you what to do anymore. You do have that right. You say, drugs are too strong. That's like saying the oppressor is too mean. It may be mean and it may be a tough taskmaster, but you need to know you have the right to be free. You have the right to be free. No woman in here under the sound of my voice should ever accept a man putting his hands on you. Ever. Ever. He has no right to put his hands on you. That's oppressive. That's a taskmaster who's saying, if you don't do what I say, I'm going to bring out the whip. He has no right to put his hands on you. And he's a punk if he does. I said it. Talking about, she made me hit her. What'd she do? Pick up your fist and drive it into her face? Is that what she did? You won't say Mike Tyson made you hit him. Not if you sane, because he crazy. You have a right to be free. You need to know that God's covenant is a covenant that frees you. The book of Galatians talked about one of the great freedoms you need to know about is freedom from legalism. Legalism are rules set up to hold you religiously hostage. They are rules set up to hold you religiously hostage. You will always know a legalist because they always define their Christian life by what you can't do. Anything that the Bible doesn't prohibit is allowed. Folk can't just make up stuff you can't do. You can't make up stuff. That's how cults are. Cults make up stuff. What they do, notice what they do. They control people. See, they control people. See, ministries that do not give you the freedom to fulfill your calling under God aren't legitimate. They're controlling. They're, in the name of God, they are oppressive. And so they make you so fearful about God going to beat you up. They make you so fearful that God going to get you. So what they do is drive fear. And they drive fear so that you can give them their money, so that you can make sure you're at every service, so you can do that. And they make fear, your fear, as the driving point of how well you function. And nobody can function free living in fear. You can't function that way. You can't maximize your potential because you're always trembling. You're always nervous. God has said you have the right to be free. Jesus said, I have come to set the captives free. Luke 4. Freedom is your right. Secondly, you cry out to God. You cry out to God. You make God your point of a reference because you're part of his covenant. You make God your point of reference. See, that's why dictator regimes want to limit religious expression. The reason why slavery was not allowed to sustain itself in America is because God was kept a part of the equation, even to the point of the Constitution. So as long as you could appeal to a freeing God, then it always limits slavery. That's why those kind of regimes don't want God as part of the culture, and they want to squash religious freedom, because religious freedom makes people free. God is so committed to freedom, he told his disciples who wanted to call down fire from heaven to burn up people who weren't responding to that message. Jesus told them they have the right not to believe. You are free not to even believe. God gives you the freedom to reject him. You know how much God believes in freedom? He gives you the freedom to say no to him. Not a wise choice, but one you are free to make. Freedom. When their human solutions were gone, they went to God, and prayer is earthly license for heavenly interference. It says that, God, I give you permission to interfere in my affairs. And here's the thing. While they were in slavery, if you read all of chapter 1, they're in slavery. At the end of chapter 2, they cry out to God, but between the slavery described in chapter 1, the oppression, and the crying out in chapter 2, there's a parenthetical statement or parenthetical passage, and it talks about the birth of Moses, the putting Moses in the Nile River, the finding of Moses by Pharaoh's daughter, the raising of Moses by Pharaoh's house, Moses killing the Egyptian. It tells that story between starting off with the oppression of Egypt and then going on to the people crying out to God. Why does it start off with the oppression, end with the people crying out for him to release the oppression, but in the middle of the story put in Moses? Because while they were going through, God wanted us to know he was working on something. He was working on a deliverer. They didn't know God was working on a deliverer. All they knew is they were going through hard times. Can I tell you something? God is working on your freedom. You don't know it. You can't see it. God is working on your freedom. You say, but I can't see any way to be free. He's working on your freedom. You say, well, when am I going to get to see what God is working on? When you start crying out. They never saw it till they cried out for it. They never saw it till they cried out for it. So, what am I saying to us today? I am saying you have a right to be free, and because you do, you should be setting other people free. You know, the tragedy of the Revolutionary War was that people who wanted to be free from England went out and started making other folks slaves. That's a contradiction. You fighting for freedom while incarcerating the whole race of people. It's a contradiction. But we have the contradiction in our own lives. We want to be treated as free while we hold other folk hostage. No. No. If you want to be free, you should be setting others free. You should be releasing others within the bounds of propriety and what's right, releasing them to become all that they were called to be under God. There's so many gifts and talents that have been held hostage from your mama, your daddy, your uncle, been held hostage by the people you grew up with, by your past, you are being held hostage. You're under this, and you have the right to be free. But you say, I'm stuck. Okay, let me help you out from an actor. His name is Charles Dutton. You know the actor. He was in prison. He was asked by a reporter one day, Charles Dutton was asked, how did you make it in prison? He said, the way I made it was I refused to decorate my cell. Okay, now you got to catch that. He said, the way I made it, I was incarcerated, couldn't get out. But other guys would have pictures up in their cells. They put flowers up in their cell. I wouldn't put any pictures up there. I wouldn't put any flowers because I was going to never make this home. Don't make your oppression home. Don't make that home. Don't act like this is where I'm supposed to be for the rest of my life, so I might as well get comfortable here because I'm stuck. As long as God is part of the equation, you're not stuck. And you always look for that day when he's going to break through and open up that cell door. Don't put pictures up in your oppression. Don't make it think like this is the only place I'm ever going to be, and I'm never going to be nothing, and I'm never going to make anything out of my life, and I'm never going to make enough money to pay my bills, and I'm never going to be able to be used of God, and I'm never. That's putting pictures up in your cell. No, you never call an oppressed situation home. Don't call it home. When liberation finally came from slavery, American slavery, many of the slaves from the South began going north because they could get to express their freedom more in the North, was the thought. So they began going north. But there were a whole bunch of slaves who said, I ain't going north. And the reason I'm not going north is I've been a slave all my life. I didn't raise slave children, and I didn't raise slave grandchildren. I got married in slavery. Slavery is all I know. And in slavery, the master's going to feed me. In slavery, the master's going to clothe me. In slavery, the master's going to employ me. So if I leave slavery, I leave the master taking care of me for unknown territory. Now, you can talk about that land flowing with milk and honey up in New York and up in Boston and all. You can talk about land flowing back. I ain't seen that. I've seen my life here. So I would rather be a comfortable slave than a risky free man. In other words, you can get so used to decorating your cell, you decide slavery is home. You decide, I'm never going to be able to ascend. I'm never going to be able to grow. I'm never going to be able to build my own business, even though I feel that's what God wants me to do. I'm never going to be able to do it because times are so hard and things are so bad, and I'm never going to be able to do it. That's the talk of a man who doesn't know God. That's the talk of a woman who doesn't know God. That's the talk of one who doesn't understand the covenant. God has declared you have the right to be free. Act like a free man. Walk like a free man, even if you have to walk in your cell. You walk like a free man, a free woman, one who's been declared to be free by God, one who's been declared to be free by redemption. You walk like a free man, talk like a free man. And I know folk ain't gonna understand how you walking free in a cell, because I've already consulted God and he got the key. So I'm practicing my free walk now. I'm practicing my free walk now, for the time when God opens up the opportunity for me to fully express it. Why not practice being free if you expect to be free? There's somebody here who needs to be set free from something, and you got a right to be free. You have a right to be free. That's your right, your God-given right to be free. To be released from illegitimate bondage, to pursue your calling under God. I don't care what the devil has told you and who he's used to speak it. That's a lie. That's a lie. Your bondage is a lie. You say, but you don't know how long I've been there. It's just been a long line. Because you got a right to be free.